Greetings and salutations and netizens, to Design Wolfphototech, and here we are with another delightful video. This time I'm going to cover Shadowrun 6th World, which is Shadowrun 6th edition. Small pro tip, whenever looking for Shadowrun products, usually each edition has a different color logo. That little symbol up there. They change the color every edition. 5th edition was red, which was the previous edition. They also had like a green and a yellow version, and which would be 2nd, 3rd edition, and so forth. This book MSRPs for $50 or $49.95 in United States dollars, or fiat bucks, or magically made up money funny. This book is approximately, I have to quick page to the very back, sits around, say there's actually a bonus section sitting in the back of this book that actually stretches the number of pages a little bit. But it sits around 330-ish pages. Now, there was, in the original version of this video that I was working on, or made, but did not upload, this incredibly long section at the beginning explaining the division of TTRPGs between story games and more mechanical systems. And then there's also simulationist systems, and then dividing up all the common mechanics between the two. Because that was, I felt the first few times when I was about to do this video, that would be really important, because it would help explain the score at the end of this video for the system. But the short gist of it is that Shadowrun exists. There is 3 major groups of TTRPGs, and then there's several classifications beyond that. That those Group 1 classifications, which is 1, 2, and 3, which is past, modern era-esque games, and far future games. And then there is story games, simulationist games, and intermediate games. There's soft game, light rule systems, modern rule systems, and crunchy rule systems. Now, Shadowrun has this fringe fan base that really loves it, but it's one of those systems that, in spite of having all kinds of awesome concepts that float around in it, interesting world, it's actually a near it's really simple. It is classified as these are the classifications for it. It is I wanted to naturally start with the explanation. It is a moderate rule system in complexity. It is roughly in the territory of like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder 2nd edition. Those are moderate systems. Those are moderate systems for rules. They're not light rule systems. They're not heavy rule systems. They're moderate rule systems. Make that clear. It is in a modern era setting game. There's games in the past, modern, and future. And then there is narrativist, simulationist, and then there's just the middle ground category of TTRPGs. And the issue that really comes up with this system is that it actually has this weird straddling effect, where it kind of starts off in one category and leans onto another category. And then in another section, it starts in one category and leans over into the other. And that's part of the problem. But let's go through the book very quickly here. First and foremost, by the way, color purple is 6th edition. So if you see a book with a purple logo on it, that's 6th edition, okay? This is the City Edition Seattle. I do really love the table of contents in this book, because this is actually a fairly in-depth table of contents. They going from 5th edition to 6th edition, they stated that they put forth a great deal of effort in trying to streamline the rule system and organize it better, which I personally don't feel that they entirely achieved. But let's continue on. It goes over basically a quarter a page and 2 entire pages and half a page. So roughly 2.75% of a pages, or almost 3 pages of table of contents. You have this nice little introduction. This actually goes over the basic structure of play and terminology, shadow slang. So they have a large focus on having the lore and the culture be a centerpiece in this book. This is typically very common in rules light systems or story games. Not so much in moderate complexity systems and crunchy systems, which this system happens to be a moderate. So first and foremost, it's set up going through the book as if it's intended to be a rules light system, and it's a D6 dice pool system. So that is a inherently rules light system. Dice pool systems tend to be what most game companies use when they want to go rules light. Personally, the dice pool system actually is really good for short-term story games. Like you want to do a one-shot or mini campaigns, where you play only like a few months. You like play every other week for like half a year or something like that. The problem with dice pool games is that there is no capacity. If you design the game with no capacity to level up, you're just playing the same kind of characters over and over again, and you're just playing through the story, which is a typical pattern for most story or narrative-oriented games. However, if you have a leveling up mechanic, dice pool systems actually inherently tilt heavily towards the players always succeeding, unless they get critical failures in their rolls that override their successes. But anyways, that's where we have this whole section right here. By the way, this is basically a replay, and then this goes over the lore. By the way, please note that when you saw the artwork, there's actually various styles of artwork in this book. This is actually my favorite style. More of a classic water or acrylic type look. I kind of like that intermediate range between acrylic paints and watercolors. However, I never preferred using watercolors myself. I cannot sit there long enough for them to dry to start painting again. We have a section of the big corporations in this book. As I said, this is very story oriented. In the case of Avatar, the last Avatar Legends or Legacy, I'm having a brain fart there. It's really late in the night, so I'm having difficulty here. But anyways, in the case of Avatar or Apocalypse World, most story-oriented games have a lot of lore and culture in the front half of the book. As you see, there's some good artwork spread throughout the book. I do say that. It reads fairly well. And then you get into the game concepts section, which just comes before the character creation section. This does a fairly decent job of explaining various traits and characteristics and tests, extended tests, different types of terms and concepts like resonance and magic and essence, initiative and so forth, the different types of actions, which is initiative actions and immediate actions. Or anytime, in other words. It explains right here. Anytime actions or initiative. Initiative refers to your turn. And anytime as anytime. It can be triggered. Like drop object. You can drop an object pretty much any time in any part of the turn. It just works out. Prone, anytime is if hit the dirt is basically a dodge action, which you can utilize is you can quickly utilize it in a defensive manner, gaining a +2 on dice on the defense test of an incoming attack. They gain to be prone status. It references the page. By the way, I actually do like that very much. That right here, that they actually put in the page number for more rules on that, which is really nice. Yet again, really nice artwork through. There's some good artwork. And it goes through all the concept of edges, which is basically the system's means of advantage / inspiration from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But there's various levels to it. You can spend various number of edges for different effects. Talks about magic and various conditions and statuses, like burning, blinded, chilled, confused, and so forth. And then you go through the various races or metahumans, like dwarves, elves, humans, orcs, and trolls. And then you go through lifestyle section here, and so forth. Then it goes into character creation. Now, as it works through here, it explains all the classes, or archetypes, as it's referred to in this system, on the first few pages, the most common ones. And then the really short explanations of the rules. And then they go on to explaining various mechanics, such as cybernetics and various other things what your character might be into, attributes, metatypes, etc., etc. And then they go into the actual classes, like adept. Got some priority tables here, skill list, so forth. Yet again, the artwork is actually pretty good overall. I'm actually a few pages off of my explanation. Explains how spells work and a few other things for your classes and so forth. And it just keeps going. By the way, this section right here is traits, like uneducated, orc poser, insomnia, honor bound, distinctive style. I'm backing up through it because I'm just relisting them again. There's positive and negative traits, which gives you points to your karma and so forth. And this is the adept. This is the archetypes. Sorry, there's a little section up in the front that basically quickly explains basic concept of the archetypes, the core ones and roles, and then it goes into all the other little traits and mechanics, and it goes through the archetypes right here. And this is, interestingly enough, all the archetypes are single page, and all the stats that are pertaining to them are in just this little bar here. And then it lists out a bunch of characteristics that you gain through this archetype or related to it. You happen to have, by the way, back up for a second, the Adept, which is basically a spellcaster that uses magic to enhance their physical capabilities. You got the Combat Mage, which is basically like a wizard that throws out spells. You got the Covert Arp Specialist, which is basically a rogue. You got a Decker, which is basically like an artificer, which specifically specializes more into programming. And then you have the Face, which is basically like the rogue. Then you have the Rigger, which is actually more like the artificer, but it's focused on building stuff. You have a Street Samurai, which is basically like a fighter or a barbarian. Street Shaman, which is basically like, my best guess is a druid minus wild shape. And then you've got Technomancer, which is also like another type of wizard. And then you have a Weapon Specialist, which is kind of also a fighter as well. I think the Adept might actually be like a monk, but they use magic to enhance their physical capabilities. Then you have the section on skills. It actually seems to explain them fairly well through here, but it's still fairly chunky in itself. Incidentally, they got the cover art in poster form, or not poster form, but fold-out form in here that you can fold out. And then you have this one right here on the back side. And there's also another one of these further in the book that is of the older edition cover and main characters. By the way, there are also starter beginner boxes for Shadowrun 6th edition as well as Shadowrun 5th edition. I will pull those out at some point and do videos of those. This is this whole section right here covers more into the lore of the gives you a little example of a gameplay scenario right here. And then it goes into the combat section. And by the way, it explains right here how edges, the different levels of spending edges. In that little column right there. Distributing edges, soak some damage, etc. Got some more artwork. Explains how the initiative system works, how the combat rounds work. An example of initiative. That's actually a nice little feature in this book that they actually give you various, and these pink columns are oftentimes examples of situations or how to set things up. This book, by the way, is a core rule book, so it contains both Game Master and player rules. Rules on barriers, grapples, multiple attacks, and so forth. Offhand attacks, breaking through, and so forth. Grunt groups, you just got attacked by a bunch of street ruffians. Or bandits. Gas grenades and building a bigger boom and so forth. The mechanics of healing in here. First aid and med kits. Magic. Natural recovery. Medical assistance. And so forth. It explains toxins, drugs in here as well. There's also a section in here, I think they have a list of, right here, of different types of drugs in the game. Like 7-7, Pepper Punch, Nauseous Gas, Narcoject, CS Tear Gas, Jazz, Bliss, Cram, Alcohol, Deep Weed, Long Haul, Nova Coke, Zen, Psych, Nitro. And then they have a section on specifically the magic. Earlier in the book, there are little sections on magic where just basically getting you the heads up on how it works. By the way, it even denotes up here adept powers, explaining how adept powers work in relationship to magic. Shamanism, and so forth. And then you have different spells right here. One of the interesting things about this system is that many times, I'll show you a page, a lot of spells are just little boxes right here with just a little bit of information, and then some spells have text under them that explain things in more detail. Some more artwork. Manipulation spells. Physical barrier. Ritual spell casting. Explaining how rituals fail. Another piece of artwork. Then you go into a little section right back here, spirit etiquette, enchanting, alchemy. And then explains the steps for doing so. Choosing an object for alchemy. So in this book right here, you also contain rules on alchemy as well for the game. You got basic foci, improved senses, and so forth. Explanation of aspected magicians. And then you have some creatures here for your aspects. And then we have, I do believe, a section into the Matrix. And this basically goes back into lore of the world and explaining, the Matrix, which is the internet. The Matrix is specifically the internet. I had like a brain fart for 5 seconds. So this is basically your net runner. If you're familiar with cyberpunk kind of role, crash program, you know what, this is the stuff your decker is doing. And then you have a section on rigging. Wildlife, which is more into the enemies in the game. Bartenders and all that other stuff like that. Section on powers and relationships. And I should just skip through this a little bit. But anyways, overall, it is fairly well organized, and considering that the table of contents at the beginning of the book is incredibly in-depth and very has everything kind of listed out on it. Here is actually a fold-out of the 5th edition cast for Shadowrun. And then you have older edition fold-out for the previous edition. Then you have a section on gear, which is guns and all the cybernetics and etc. Physical barriers and such. Got shotguns and machine guns and cannons and armor and all kinds of fun stuff here. Data chips, data tap, RFID tags, and so forth. Jammers, tag eraser, data soft, auto softs, and so forth. Soft is basically software. Sequencer, glue sprayer, climbing gear, and so forth. Then you got stuff on biotech here as well. And just like, I'm jumping pages now because I don't want to take this forever. You got stuff for your headwear and your cyber jacks and your eyewear and your arms and your legs. That's earwear. Skillwear, your cybernetic arms or legs. Yep. There's also a tabletop. Cerebral boosters. Reflex recorders and so forth. So you got all your cyberware in here as well. You got a section on vehicles, airplanes, cars, bikes, drones, and so forth. Some more artwork. And then at the very back you have an index. This is handy dandy for finding other details you cannot find in the extensive table of contents in the front. The index is actually really well spread out. This is actually a good example of the 5th edition symbol for Shadowrun. I believe Sprawl Ops is specifically a version of Shadowrun that is board game slash skirmish game, yes. Right after the index section, you have a whole section on tables for the game master to quickly reference, just in case they forget about, say, like, oh, matrix actions. They can quickly, oh, yeah, that's what that is. That's all your matrix actions. Edges in combat, edge points, heat effect table, meters per combat round, noise, availability table, structure rating, and so forth. And then you have a character sheet. There is lethal damage and non-lethal damage, or physical and stun damage. In other words, physical and stun damage in this game. There's only like 2 pages for this system. And then in the back, there's this extra section just for Seattle, which covers the lore and special rules of Seattle. And there we go. I just have a grid of the street. I do say that this is actually a pretty neat system in itself. I'm gonna have to grab one of my piles here, pull it over. This actually has the Game Master screen right on top of it, but I'll put Shadowrun 6th World up here for now. Okay, quickie drinky. I'm the only one drinks from that jug. Shadowrun is a really interesting and really cool game, but due to the way it's set up, or oftentimes explained by some people, it tends to make it more overly complicated than it should be. The way the book is initially set up, with a large focus on world lore and slang terms and culture and examples of play, makes it feel more like a story game. And the fact that it's a D6 system, a dice pool system, also lends into that aspect. However, when you get into the conditions and the layering of effects from cybernetics and spells and how you cast spells and the rules that are related to the various layers between different types of spells, like summoning creatures can exist. Summoned creatures, or spirits basically, can exist simultaneously in the spirit world as well as in the physical world. Manifest between both of them. People exist basically in this world, but not. But they're basically just outlines, or you can see them, but they're not entirely in the spiritual world. And then there are certain things that are not entirely, like, you look at electronics. Electronics basically are just electronics. You can't read anything in the spirit world. So there's a lot of layers to the mechanics in the system. So the system has this fundamental weird spot where it starts out with this focus on a story game, low, very simplified rules system concept. So people, when they hear of like, oh, it's a D6 dice pool system, it's a very magical world, well, it's set in the modern day in like Seattle or Detroit or New York, they kind of get the feel that it is a story game. However, when they get digging into the game, they end up finding out that there's layers of statuses and interactions between various magical effects and cybernetics and the real world and the spiritual world and so forth. And that layers in. So a lot of people who get into it, from my surmise, it gets projected towards the story people. They look at it, they come in, and then they some of them get really confused because they just want a really simple system to tell stories with. It doesn't work out for them. And then there is the really mechanical system people, the simulation system people, or the crunchy people. They look at it, and then you have this D6 system, that dice pool system it doesn't naturally positively lend itself to really long campaigns, because if you level up and you gain more dice to your dice pools and stuff like that in a dice pool system, you end up with a situation where you cannot fail, or you end up with situations where you basically have to add and subtract things and remember. It just gets weirdly complicated. This is one of those strange situations where it's built on a concept that is super simplified, but then there's layers built on top of that really simple system that jut off in different directions. And if you don't have the time to like read through the entire thing in entire depth, or have people someone who is very experienced in playing the game, this is one of those games you really need like a friend who has played it before, or has read or watched a lot of videos on it, and I know how this works out, and then they just like take you right into it, and they guide you along, and then it works out. It's one of those systems that kind of needs a better way of onboarding people. And I do, in fact, have the beginner boxes for both 5th edition. The wrapper is on it. I keep the wrapper on it by default because it protects the box. And the 6th edition beginner box, which actually has quick start rules in it as well. So there you go. That's probably going to be my future thing I'm going to cover, is some more of the starter boxes. But anyways, Shadowrun is one of those franchises that is like really, really cool, and once you like look into it and learn about it, there's a lot of options for a lot of different styles of games. Being that this is an actual dragon on the cover, it's a fusion of sci-fi and fantasy. Lends itself to, like, you could play Shadowrun more like Dungeons and Dragons, or you could play it more like Cyberpunk, or you could play it somewhere in between, in a blend. So this is one of those things where it has so many different scoops from different categories going into it. It actually kind of complicates itself. It's one of those things. I have yet to play this before, but I have seen people play it, and it looks like it's a ton of fun, provided that you can remember all the special layers and the rules for your character class. It looks like you're going to have a ton of fun. But oftentimes people complain with Shadowrun that it's really hard to learn the rules, which is actually a terrible way to sell your TTRPG. Dear fans of a TTRPG, do not tell people that your system is really hard to understand. That is a dumb idea. If you tell them it's really hard to understand, they will avoid it. Unless they're people that you specifically want to keep away from your system. But then there's the problem of, if you keep people away from your system, then your system doesn't get the support it needs, and then it dies, and then they have to come back and make another edition in a few years, or they just abandon it completely. So this is one of those situations where, from what I can say, it is like a 3.25 star system. It can easily slide into that sub 3 star territory. Uh, there's some really weird choices in the layering of the mechanics, which would be nice if they could figure out a way to not do it in certain ways, but they've simplified it down from previous editions, so that's awesome in itself. However, it could also be much better. So my score is basically just right around at that. This is a preliminary score of a 3.25. It could turn out to be way better than that. It could also be way worse. But, you know, this might actually be a situation where you might want to have something like a D&D Beyond or a Shadowrun Nexus off a Demiplane. That would probably help it out a lot more, because you might be able to automate some of the outer mechanics and layers in it. So you can, you know, like, tag your character with a condition and then put in, like, oh, burning 2, and there you go. It does it automatically, adjusts everything, and awesome. You now know how it all affects itself. So there you go. If you happen to enjoy this video, please leave a like on the video and subscribe. By the way, this was the highest voted one in the recent poll. Feel free to vote in those community tab polls. I'm just curious as to what people are most interested in. If people seem to be super interested in a particular TTRPG franchise more often than other ones, I will probably focus on getting more coverage on those ones, and maybe deep dive into and maybe read through more sections in finer detail and explain some of the mechanics as best as I can for the games, and see if I can get like a game together or something, you know, like play a game of something. So there you go. I hope you have a delightful day, a nice night, a wonderful weekend, a magnificent month, and see you next time. Ciao.